Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. There's no question that the Republican Party today is dominated, driven, and intimidated by Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans. And that is a threat to this country. MAGA Republicans do not respect the Constitution. They do not believe in the rule of law. They do not recognize the will of the people. They refuse to accept the results of a free election. And they're working right now, as I speak, in state after state, to give power to decide elections in America to partisans and cronies, empowering election deniers to undermine democracy itself.
Yes, he used the term MAGA Republicans, or presumably far-right Trump supporters. Of course, we don't know exactly how far-right or where the line is when it comes to Trump and the Trump supporters that Biden sees as extremist threats. Is it the people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th alone? Is it the people who've been making those violent threats against the FBI agents and even the judges involved in the Mar-a-Lago search alone? Or is it anyone who plans on voting for Donald Trump if he runs? It's honestly that lack of specific clarity that could open up the president to criticism from Republicans and independents and maybe even some Democrats as we head into the midterm elections. Because just think about this, people. A president of the United States of America explicitly saying that a group of Americans, maybe a small group, maybe a larger group, that group is a threat to the United States. It might not be completely unprecedented. We did have a Revolutionary War, right? We had a Civil War. But nonetheless, it is shocking to hear this in 2022. It might not be as shocking to hear who he identifies as the root of the extremist problem. On that, Biden was crystal clear: Donald Trump. Here is some of what the president had to say about his predecessor's persistent influence on the Republican Party.
That's why respected conservatives like Federal Circuit Court Judge Michael Isikoff has called Trump and the extreme MAGA Republicans, quote, a clear and present danger to our democracy. MAGA Republicans have made their choice. They embrace anger. They thrive on chaos. They live not in the light of truth, but in the shadow of lies. But together we can choose a different path. We can choose a better path forward to the future. A future of possibility, a future to build and dream and hope. And we're on that path moving ahead.
It does not take a rocket scientist or a political scientist to see that them's fighting words. Was Biden's address the first step in the right direction? Or was Biden's address the equivalent of pouring gas on the fire? And just where does this put us as a nation in this long, great experiment that is the United States of America? Fortunately, I've got somebody here who has spent his entire career assessing that very question. Michael Isikoff is the chief investigative correspondent for Yahoo News, and he spent several years as the national investigative correspondent for NBC News and Newsweek, covering the war on terror and extremist threats. He's currently the host of the podcasts Skullduggery and Conspiracyland, and he's the author of the book Russian Roulette, the inside story of Putin's war on America and the election of Donald Trump. Okay, Michael, I want to play, if I can, another moment from Biden's speech tonight. You know, this was mostly about the hope part, speaking to the future and what he hopes for the republic. Take a look.
So tonight, I've come to this place where it all began to speak as plainly as I can to the nation about the threats we face, about the power we have in our own hands to meet these threats, and about the incredible future that lies in front of us if only we choose it. For a long time, we've told ourselves that American democracy is guaranteed, but it's not. We have to defend it, protect it, stand up for it, each and every one of us.
So, Michael Isikoff, if you watch the wrap-up, every time a speech like this ends, the cable news, cacophony begins on either channel, you will hear two different assessments. One is that this guy is dangerous and that this is not the uniter-in-chief, he's the divider-in-chief. And if you listen to the other side, they'll say, well, isn't that just, rainbows and unicorns? What's your assessment?
Well, it's a complex one. I think that the words were important. Biden was addressing an issue that really is significant for the future of our democracy. We all watched the January 6th committee hearings. We all saw spelled out the extensive efforts by MAGA Republicans led by Donald Trump to overturn the results of the 2020 election. And, we were paying so much attention to that in May and June, and then we've all been distracted over the past month by this separate question about Trump's handling of classified documents that we forgot what is the more important issue, which is the election deniers out there who are undermining, who are a threat to our democratic system. That said, you started out this show by pointing out we're 10 weeks from the midterm election. So one has to raise the question about timing here. Is this going to be viewed as a dispassionate speech by an American president who's genuinely concerned about the future direction of the country and the threat posed by MAGA Republicans? Or is it going to be viewed as a pre-election speech to rouse up the Democratic base for the midterm elections and save Democratic control of Congress? And I think just by the mere timing of it, inevitably, there's going to be a big chunk of the country who view it in the latter, through the latter lens. And, that's kind of unfortunate. If Biden could have given this speech, 3 months ago, 6 months ago, or he could have given it after the midterm elections. But the fact that we're in the midst of a midterm election, a consequential one for control of the Congress, I think is going to undercut the larger, more important message that Biden wanted to deliver. Another critique I'll offer here is the tone. The president was shouting through much of this speech. The message was one that should have been delivered in a much more conversational and dispassionate tone. I think that people will hear that, the words are one thing. Biden's delivery and the way he delivered it, I don't think helped the message that he wanted people to take from this speech.
It was interesting you say that, because I thought, wow, this sounds like a campaign speech. It sounds like maybe he's taking a page out of Trump's book, where Trump is very passionate and very vociferous when he gives his speeches. So, I'm glad you brought that up.
That undercuts the message that Biden was, and the stance and the position that Biden was trying to take here, which is, more in sorrow than in anger. We're facing a real threat here to our democratic way of life. And I think, the way he delivered it, and again, the timing, makes it look more partisan, more political than perhaps the president wanted people to take away. But just one more point, this does have a political purpose. I don't know how many people are, independents or Republicans are going to be persuaded, but it does help, stir up that base, that Democratic base, who are really angry watching those January 6th committee hearings and don't want to let that go, and want to
those
hear
pesky bases. Right? Those pesky bases that we keep hearing about in primaries as well. They seem to really have us by the you-know-whats, and a lot of us out here in the country just want some peace and, goodwill, which really leads to my next question, and that is, when you think about before the speech, I kept thinking, I'll bet he's going to put out the olive branch and acknowledge Trump supporters who have felt left behind, who have felt as though no one's ever listened to them, no one's ever cared, and watched their power just sort of seep away. And that didn't happen. I mean, instead it was, Trump's a clear and present threat, and, come together and defend democracy regardless of your ideology. And I kept waiting for the overtures from the uniter-in-chief that he promised he was going to be. And I didn't feel that there were any. And maybe it was just my, skeptical, critical eye. I don't know.
But what did we get later in the speech, which is Biden reciting all his accomplishments as president, the American Rescue Plan, the climate change bill, all that. That sounds like standard political rhetoric during a election campaign, right? And yeah. I don't know what that was doing in a speech that was really about larger issues. It was supposed to be about larger issues about the soul of America. When you mix it in with, hey, and look at all I've accomplished, a lot of which is controversial, even with non-MAGA Republicans, who say, some of those things you did, the American Rescue Plan, stoked inflation, wasn't so great. That's not an extremist position. That's a reasonable position that, many Democratic economists have held, right? But, there was Biden, touting it as though this was an election speech. And so, I don't think that
as a journalist,
yeah,
we all smell a rat. We always smell a rat. We're always looking for the reason for everything, not just the surface value of anything. And as I looked at how often he actually invoked Donald Trump by name, which is something he really hasn't done, right? This is just something from the moment he, swore his oath. He just sort of put his head down and marched forward and avoided the whole Donald Trump name. And then tonight it was just like, whew, it was just vomited out. And I wonder if this was the backdoor campaign speech to keep the name Donald Trump at the head of the Republican Party and to hammer home to anybody listening that it's Donald Trump you would be voting for if you're going to vote Republican. Because it seems to me, all the analysts have said, the Republicans don't do well when Donald Trump is going to be at the helm, when he's considered at the helm. We just saw Sarah Palin's result in Alaska. Yeah. Do you think that this was a backdoor attempt to say, it's DT if you're Big R?
Yeah, Ashleigh, you're absolutely right. I think the polling is clear. Trump is an albatross for the Republicans. Republicans running for Congress, running for the Senate, don't want to be, except for the extreme MAGA Republicans who Trump put there, they don't want to be talking about Donald Trump. They know he's too controversial a figure at this point. There are too many questions about him. So the Democratic goal here is to put Trump front and center for political advantage. And that's exactly what Joe Biden was doing. So, again, there was an important, larger message here, but it's undercut by the sort of, nakedly political, partisan undergirding to much of this speech.
So is that going to push a lot of Democratic candidates to, really repel him on the campaign trail leading into the midterms? Because, this might be considered just too hot to handle?
No, I think most Democratic candidates agree with everything the president said. They want to be running against Donald Trump as well. So they'll be happy to hear this message, or at least to their base voters. This is going to help get them to the polls, and that's an important part, especially in a midterm election. I just don't know that it has much appeal beyond the core Democratic base, even though it should.
Okay, so in a look ahead to the speech before Biden even, stood in front of Independence Hall, Kevin McCarthy, the leader of the House Republicans, the minority leader, did a pre-buttal. Basically, I'm going to offset the power of this speech by decrying Joe Biden for all of these particular things. Let me run a quick soundbite from it. I want to ask you about it on the other side. Take a look.
President Biden has chosen to divide, demean, and disparage his fellow Americans. Why? Simply because they disagree with his policies. That is not leadership. When the president speaks tonight at Independence Hall, the first lines out of his mouth should be to apologize for slandering tens of millions of Americans as fascists.
Well, he didn't apologize. The first things out of his mouth were not that, but he did in his speech say MAGA Republicans, MAGA extremism, semi-fascism, white supremacists. And I wonder if this will galvanize his base for sure, but will it put off a lot of independents or conservative Democrats? Will he lose support among the sort of the mid-range, easygoing Democrat who thought things were going pretty well over the summer?
I mean, look, McCarthy, casting this as Democrats who didn't like Trump's policies sort of, defies reality here. What has got people worked up about Trump's conduct? It wasn't his policies as president. It was, after the post-election, refusing to accept the results of the election and inciting a mob to storm the Capitol. That was what was appalling. That's what Biden was talking about. That's what Democrats have been talking about. And more recently, they've been talking about his grotesque mishandling of classified documents that didn't belong to him. That has nothing to do with Donald Trump's policies as president. But, Trump's conduct that has people riled up, on the Democratic side of the aisle is not about his policies. It's about his conduct. And McCarthy is sort of hiding the ball when he uses the formulation that he did there.
So speaking of the conduct, the picture on the screen has sort of had 24/7, exposure since the DOJ released that in its filing the other night. And it's the files that were discovered in Donald Trump's office. They were not scattered on the floor. That wasn't the way Donald Trump left them. That was the way the FBI chose to photograph the evidence with their evidence placards to connote size, length, shape, and everything else. That aside, I had been dying to ask you about the future. And after all you've covered in your decades, I don't know. Yeah, you know where I'm going. I don't know how this country is going to handle a possible indictment. I don't think there will be a perp walk. I don't think there'll be a public mugshot. It's a federal case after all. But, there's Lindsey Graham, saying he suspects there'll be riots. And there will be people like those on January 6th who will go ballistic. But just how much of it do you think will actually come to fruition? How much blood in the streets do you think will run?
Look, it's really hard to say, but, the threats are real. I mean, election officials all across the country have experienced this, and the rhetoric and even comments like Lindsey Graham just made are an incitement of sorts. So at a time when you have, really scary threats against public officials for doing their job, for people, for the MAGA Republicans, for Trump, for allies like Lindsey Graham to be talking like that is certainly not helpful. Who knows? I mean, none of us expected to see what we saw on January 6th. And, could it happen again? Sure it can. And it's something we all have to be worried about. And particularly if you're an election official in a battleground state where you're going to get bombarded by election deniers if you certify an election for a Democrat, you're facing a threat. And that's a disturbing thing.
We've already had one county that's just sort of evaporated its elections officials. They've all walked out, and so there's none left. And I sure hope they can find some level-headed people to take those jobs. Michael Isikoff, it's always a treat. Thank you so much for this. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.